The biggest mistake I ever made was assuming family automatically meant trust. If someone had told me that a forgotten USB drive sitting on my kitchen counter would eventually save my marriage, I would have laughed and gone back to flipping pancakes. But that Saturday morning started like 100 others before it. The smell of butter filled the kitchen as sunlight poured through the blinds, painting bright stripes across the hardwood floor. I stood at the stove wearing an old college sweatshirt, turning golden pancakes while coffee brewed beside me. My wife, Alicia, sat at the island scrolling through her phone, still wearing gray sweatpants and one of my oversized t-shirts. She looked peaceful, the way she always did before a long weekend. Those quiet mornings were my favorite part of life. No football practice, no school meetings, no rushing anywhere. Just the two of us sharing breakfast in the house we had spent 8 years building together. Alicia smiled as she looked up from her screen. You know, one day I'm going to learn how you make these taste better than mine. I laughed. That's because you follow recipes. I just guess. She rolled her eyes. That's not how cooking works. Apparently it does. She shook her head and reached for her coffee mug. It was one of those ordinary conversations that seem unimportant until life changes and you realize you'd give anything to have them back. Outside, a lawnmower hummed somewhere down the block. A dog barked twice and then went silent. The neighborhood felt calm, predictable, safe. At least that's what I believed. I carried a plate to the island and sat beside Alicia. We were halfway through breakfast when I heard tires crunch across the driveway. Alicia glanced toward the front window. That's Vanessa. I wasn't surprised. Her older sister had a habit of showing up without warning. Vanessa Carter worked in real estate and seemed to spend most of her free time inserting herself into other people's business. She wasn't openly rude. She didn't need to be. Everything she said carried just enough edge to make you wonder what she really meant. 30 seconds later, the front door opened. Hope I'm not interrupting breakfast, Vanessa called out as she walked inside. She wore designer sunglasses pushed onto her head, white sneakers that looked brand new, and a fitted athletic jacket despite the warm weather. You never interrupt breakfast, Alicia said. You usually arrive right when the food is ready. Vanessa laughed and hugged her sister. Then her eyes moved across the kitchen. I noticed something strange immediately. She wasn't looking at us. She was studying the room. The countertops, the shelves, the dining table, almost like she was searching for something. Coffee? Alicia asked. Please. Vanessa stepped toward the island. As she did, her attention stopped on an object near the fruit bowl. A small black USB drive. I barely noticed it. To me, it was clutter. One more forgotten item sitting among grocery receipts and spare keys. But Vanessa froze for half a second. Just a moment. Most people wouldn't have caught it. I did. Her expression changed so quickly, I almost convinced myself I imagined it. What's that? She asked casually. I glanced down. No idea. Probably something old. You don't know what's on it. The question felt oddly specific. Haven't looked in years. Vanessa nodded slowly. Interesting. Then she picked up her coffee and changed the subject. The conversation moved on. Alicia started talking about a difficult patient at the pediatric clinic. I discussed preseason training schedules. Vanessa laughed at the appropriate moments. Everything seemed normal again. Yet every few minutes I caught her staring toward that USB drive. Not at me. Not at Alicia. At the drive. And for the first time all morning, a strange feeling settled in my chest. Because whatever was sitting inside that tiny piece of plastic suddenly seemed very important to Vanessa Carter. The next afternoon, Alicia suggested we visit the farmer's market downtown. It had become one of her favorite weekend traditions ever since a group of local vendors started setting up along the riverfront. The weather was perfect for it. Bright blue skies stretched above the city, and a light breeze carried the smell of roasted nuts, fresh bread, and barbecue from food stands lined across 3 blocks. I spent most of the morning helping a neighbor move patio furniture before meeting Alicia near the entrance. Vanessa was already there when I arrived. That caught me off guard. She rarely showed interest in anything that did not directly benefit her. Farmers markets were usually too slow, too ordinary, too small town for her taste. Yet there she stood beside Alicia holding an iced coffee and wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my monthly utility bill. There he is, Vanessa said with a smile that looked practiced. We started walking together through the crowd. Children chased bubbles near a fountain. A musician played acoustic guitar under a canopy. Vendors offered samples of peaches and homemade jams. Everything felt normal until Vanessa casually slipped beside me while Alicia stopped to examine a display of handmade candles. "Did you ever figure out what was on that flash drive?" she asked. I looked at her. "No. What? Just curious." Her answer came too quickly. "Most people do not keep random electronics sitting around for years." I shrugged. "Maybe it has old tax documents or football drills from 10 years ago." "You really have no idea?" Again, the same question. Different wording. Something about her interest felt unnatural. Before I could respond, Alicia returned carrying 2 scented candles, and the conversation ended. For the next hour, we moved between booths selling honey, flowers, baked goods, and handmade furniture. Vanessa seemed distracted. Several times I noticed her checking her phone. At one point, she stepped away to answer a call and lowered her voice so neither of us could hear. When she came back, her mood had shifted. She looked tense. Not angry. Nervous. That was new. Vanessa was normally the most confident person in any room. Seeing uncertainty on her face was like spotting snow in July. Around lunchtime, we sat at a picnic table overlooking the river. Alicia went to buy lemonade while I stayed behind. A few moments later, Vanessa leaned forward. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Sure." She hesitated. "Have you ever thought about cleaning out old files? Getting rid of things you do not need anymore?" I laughed. "You sound like a professional organizer." She did not laugh back. "I am serious." "Not really." "What?" She looked toward the water. "Sometimes holding on to old things causes problems." Before I could ask what she meant, Alicia returned balancing 3 cups. Vanessa immediately changed the subject and started talking about vacation plans. The shift was so abrupt it felt rehearsed. By late afternoon, we headed back toward the parking garage. Alicia wanted to stop at a bakery before going home, so she ran across the street while I waited near my truck. That was when something unexpected happened. An older man approached me. Gray hair, work boots, sun-weathered face. He stared for a second before smiling. "Marcus Johnson?" I recognized him immediately. Harold Simmons, a retired contractor I had not seen in nearly 6 years. We shook hands and spent a few minutes catching up. Then his expression changed. "You still keep records better than anybody?" he asked. "Probably." "Good." He nodded thoughtfully. "That habit saved somebody once." I smiled politely, unsure what he was talking about. Then he glanced toward Vanessa, who was standing 30 feet away near the curb. The moment she noticed Harold looking at her, the color drained from her face. She turned away so quickly it almost looked like panic. Harold noticed it too. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Interesting," he murmured. "What?" I asked. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something important. Instead, he shook his head. "Never mind. Maybe another time." Then he walked away. I stood there watching him disappear into the crowd while a strange feeling settled over me. Because whatever history existed between Harold Simmons and Vanessa Carter, neither of them wanted me asking questions. Tuesday evening brought one of those late summer sunsets that seemed to stretch forever across the sky. Orange lights spilled over the football field behind Jefferson High School as I locked up the equipment shed after practice. Most of the players had already left. The bleachers stood empty. A few scraps of paper tumbled across the parking lot in the wind. Normally, those quiet moments helped me clear my head. That evening, my thoughts kept drifting somewhere else. By the time I got home, Alicia was working a night shift at the pediatric clinic. The house felt unusually still. No television, no conversation, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak from the air conditioning system. I reheated leftovers and sat alone at the kitchen table. Halfway through dinner, my eyes landed on a framed photograph hanging near the hallway. It had been there for years, yet I suddenly found myself staring at it longer than usual. The picture had been taken at a lake house almost 7 years earlier. Back then, Alicia and I had spent an entire holiday weekend there with family and friends. Everyone looked younger, less complicated. Vanessa stood near the dock wearing a bright yellow jacket, smiling directly at the camera. Looking at that image unlocked a memory I had not thought about in years. It happened during the second evening of that trip. I remembered sitting on the back deck long after everyone else had gone inside. Vanessa had joined me unexpectedly. She seemed upset, not dramatic, genuinely worried. At the time, she had been involved in a real estate transaction that was falling apart. A property dispute, missing paperwork, potential legal trouble. She had spent nearly an hour talking through the situation while staring out across the dark water. I remembered her saying something very specific. You are lucky, Marcus. People trust you. At the time, I thought it was a compliment. Now the memory felt different somehow. Strange how certain conversations change meaning years later. My phone vibrated against the table, pulling me back to the present. The screen displayed an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. Hello. A woman's voice came through. Is this Marcus Johnson? Yes. My name is Cynthia Barnes. I am sorry to bother you. I was given your number by Harold Simmons. I sat up straighter. Hearing Harold's name immediately got my attention. Okay. There was a pause before she continued. I do not know what role Vanessa Carter currently plays in your life. But if Harold reached out to me, then something must have happened. Every instinct told me this conversation was important. What are you talking about? Another pause. Longer this time. Several years ago, Vanessa convinced me to invest in a property development project. She presented documents that looked legitimate. Everything seemed professional. I listened carefully. What happened? I lost nearly $60,000. The words landed hard. Cynthia sounded embarrassed even after all these years. The investigation never went anywhere. Nobody could prove intentional wrongdoing. Eventually, everyone moved on. I leaned forward. Why are you telling me this now? Because Harold called me yesterday and asked if I remembered certain details. My heartbeat slowed. Not from calmness. From concentration. Pieces that did not fit were beginning to gather in the same place. Cynthia continued. Before the situation collapsed, Vanessa became extremely concerned about old records. Emails. Files. Backup copies. She spent months trying to track them down. My eyes shifted across the kitchen. Toward the counter. Toward the small black USB drive sitting exactly where I had left it. A cold sensation moved through my chest. What kind of files? I asked quietly. Cynthia exhaled. I never found out. But I remember one thing very clearly. Vanessa believed someone had stored evidence she could not access. For several seconds I could not speak. Outside, headlights swept across the front window as a car passed by. The house suddenly felt different. Smaller somehow. Like the walls were moving closer. Cynthia lowered her voice. Marcus, if she suddenly cares about something from the past, there is probably a reason. The call ended a few minutes later. I remained seated at the table long after the screen went dark. The leftover food sat untouched. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall. For the first time, I stopped wondering why Vanessa wanted information about that forgotten drive. Instead, a far more unsettling question entered my mind. What if she already knew exactly what was on it? The following morning started with rain. Not a storm, just a steady drizzle that turned the neighborhood gray and left beads of water clinging to every mailbox and tree branch. I arrived at Jefferson High before sunrise and parked near the stadium entrance. Usually I enjoyed those early hours. The campus felt peaceful before students filled the hallways. That morning my concentration was gone. During a staff meeting, I caught myself staring through the conference room window while other coaches discussed schedules and transportation plans. Every few minutes my mind returned to the same question. If Vanessa already knew something important might be on that USB drive, why had she never simply asked for it directly? By lunchtime, I had convinced myself I was overthinking everything. Maybe there was a harmless explanation. Maybe Harold and Cynthia were mistaken. Maybe I had connected unrelated events into a story that did not exist. Then my phone buzzed. A text from Alicia. Can we have dinner with Vanessa tonight? She wants to talk about something important. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Something about it immediately felt wrong. Vanessa was not the type of person who requested serious conversations over dinner. She preferred surprises. Still, I agreed. At 6 o'clock that evening, we met at a family-owned Italian restaurant near the river. The place smelled like garlic, fresh bread, and roasted tomatoes. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. Framed black and white photographs covered the walls. Alicia arrived first. Vanessa showed up 10 minutes later carrying a large envelope. My stomach tightened the moment I saw it. She slid into the booth across from us and forced a smile. Thank you both for coming. Alicia looked concerned. What is this about? Vanessa placed the envelope on the table but did not open it immediately. Instead, she folded her hands together and lowered her eyes. The performance was convincing. If I did not know her better, I might have believed she was nervous. I struggled with whether I should say anything, she began. But Alicia deserves the truth. Every muscle in my body became alert. Alicia frowned. What truth? Vanessa took a slow breath and opened the envelope. Several printed photographs appeared. She pushed them across the table toward my wife. My chest felt hollow. Alicia picked up the first image. Her face changed instantly. Confusion, then disbelief, then something worse. The photographs showed me standing beside a woman I did not recognize. One image appeared to be taken in a parking lot. Another showed us entering a coffee shop. A third looked like we were sitting together at an outdoor table. I grabbed the photos. The quality was grainy but clear enough to identify me. "What is this?" I asked. Vanessa looked at me sadly, almost sympathetically. "That is exactly what I hoped you would explain." Alicia stared at me. Not angry. Not yet. But uncertainty had entered the room. I could see it. "Marcus," she said quietly. I looked again at the images. Something felt off. The clothes were mine. The location seemed familiar. Yet I had absolutely no memory of the woman. "I do not know who she is." Vanessa immediately shook her head. "Please do not insult Alicia's intelligence." I felt irritation rising for the first time. "I am telling the truth." The waiter arrived with water glasses, completely unaware that the atmosphere at our table had transformed. Nobody touched the menus. Nobody ordered food. Vanessa reached into the envelope again. This time she removed several sheets of paper. "There is more." Alicia's expression tightened. Vanessa handed her the documents. I leaned forward. Hotel receipts. Printed email confirmations. Reservation numbers. Dates. Every page appeared connected to me. My name was everywhere. Alicia slowly lowered the papers. The restaurant noise faded into the background. For a few seconds, all I could hear was the clink of silverware from a distant table and rain tapping softly against the windows. Then Vanessa delivered the sentence that changed everything. "I did not want to believe it either," she said. "But someone sent these to me 3 days ago." 3 days ago. My mind immediately caught that detail. 3 days ago was exactly when Vanessa had become unusually interested in the USB drive. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Not fear. Not panic. Suspicion. Because for the first time, I stopped wondering whether I was being accused of something. I started wondering who had created the accusation. The drive home felt longer than the 20 minutes shown on the dashboard clock. Rain streaked across the windshield while Alicia sat quietly in the passenger seat, holding the envelope on her lap. She was not interrogating me. Somehow that made the silence worse. Questions could be answered. Silence created space for doubt. Streetlights reflected off the wet pavement as we crossed the river and entered our neighborhood. Neither of us turned on the radio. When we finally pulled into the driveway, Alicia remained seated for a moment before speaking. "I want to believe you." Her voice was calm. "Careful. Then believe me," I said. "I have never seen that woman before." She looked down at the photographs again. "I know what you were saying. I am trying." That word stayed with me long after we walked inside. Trying. Not believing. Not trusting. Trying. Around 10 o'clock, Alicia went upstairs to shower. I stayed in the kitchen staring at the envelopes spread across the counter. For the first time, I stopped reacting emotionally and started examining details. That was how I coached football. That was how I solved problems. Look at the evidence. Ignore assumptions. Find what does not belong. I pulled the photographs closer. One image showed me entering a coffee shop. Another captured me standing beside the mystery woman near a parking lot. At first glance, everything appeared convincing. Then I noticed something strange. In the parking lot photograph, the woman cast a shadow. I did not. I leaned closer. The angle of the afternoon sunlight did not match. My pulse quickened. I grabbed my reading glasses from a drawer and studied the image again. There it was. A subtle outline around my shoulder. An editing error. Tiny. Easy to miss. But real. I immediately reached for my laptop. 20 minutes later, I had enlarged the photograph on the screen. The inconsistency became obvious. Someone had manipulated the image. The realization did not bring relief. It brought determination. Because fake evidence meant a real person had created it. My phone rang unexpectedly. The caller ID displayed Derek Moore. Derek and I had been friends for nearly 15 years. He owned a cybersecurity consulting business and spent his days analyzing digital records. "You sound stressed," he said after hearing my voice. "That obvious?" "Very." I hesitated before telling him everything. The photographs, the receipts, the anonymous source, the strange behavior surrounding the USB drive. Derek listened without interrupting. When I finished, he remained silent for several seconds. Then he asked a question I was not expecting. Did Vanessa ever mention a company called Riverstone Development? I sat upright. No. Why? Because that name sounds familiar. I heard keyboard clicks through the phone. Give me a second. More typing followed. Then Derek suddenly stopped. Marcus. His tone had changed completely. What? You are not going to like this. My stomach tightened. Derek continued. About 8 years ago, Riverstone Development was involved in a property dispute. Most of the records disappeared during litigation, but one name appears repeatedly in archived filings. I already knew the answer before he said it. Vanessa. Yes. I rubbed my forehead. The room suddenly felt warmer. There is more, Derek said. One of the attorneys listed in those filings was Harold Simmons' son. For a moment, I could not process the connection. Then everything snapped into place. Harold. Cynthia. The missing records. Vanessa's fixation on old files. The pieces were beginning to form a picture. Can you send me everything? I asked. Already doing it. A notification appeared on my laptop seconds later. Several documents arrived. Most were legal filings and public records. Then I opened the final attachment. My breath caught immediately. It was a scanned inventory sheet dated 7 years earlier. A list of archived materials connected to the Riverstone dispute. Email backups. Transaction records. Financial statements. Witness correspondence. At the bottom of the page sat a handwritten note. Storage transferred to M. Johnson for safekeeping. I stared at my own name. Not because I remembered receiving those files. I did not. What shocked me was the date. The transfer occurred during the exact weekend at the lake house from my old photograph. Suddenly that forgotten memory returned with crystal clarity. Vanessa had handed me a small storage device that night. She claimed it contained business records she wanted protected while lawyers sorted out paperwork. I had completely forgotten about it. Until now. Upstairs, I heard the shower water shut off. Downstairs, my eyes slowly shifted toward the kitchen counter where the USB drive still sat beneath the overhead light. And for the first time, I realized it might not contain clues about somebody else's problem. It might contain the reason all of this was happening. Thursday arrived with clear skies and unusually cool air for late summer. Instead of heading straight home after work, I drove 20 miles east toward a small recreational area outside town. A narrow road wound through rolling hills before ending near a public campground beside a reservoir. I had not visited that place in years. Whenever life became noisy, I occasionally came there to think. The water stretched across the horizon like polished glass. A few fishing boats drifted in the distance. Geese moved through patches of tall grass near the shoreline. Nobody recognized me there. Nobody asked questions. For the first time all week, my mind felt less crowded. I carried a folding chair from the truck and sat beneath a large oak tree overlooking the reservoir. The USB drive rested inside my jacket pocket, not because I planned to open it. Somehow carrying it had become a habit, like keeping hold of a puzzle piece that might eventually explain everything. Around noon, a golden retriever wandered over and dropped a tennis ball beside my boot. I looked up to see an older man jogging toward me. Sorry about that, he called. He thinks everybody wants to play fetch. The dog sat down and stared at me expectantly. Against my better judgment, I threw the ball. The dog exploded across the grass as if competing in the Olympics. For the first time in days, I laughed. A real laugh. The kind that catches you by surprise. The owner shook his head. Best athlete in the family. We spent a few minutes talking before he continued down the trail. The brief exchange should have been meaningless. Yet it reminded me how strange the previous week had become. A few days earlier, my biggest concern involved football schedules. Now I was carrying possible evidence connected to events from years ago while questioning the motives of someone I had known for almost a decade. Later that afternoon, my phone vibrated. Alicia. I answered immediately. How was your day? She asked. Her voice sounded lighter than it had at the restaurant. Quiet. Which is probably what I needed. Good. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then she surprised me. I know things have been difficult. I waited. But I never stopped wanting this to make sense. Those words mattered more than she probably realized. Not because they solved anything. Because they meant she had not completely surrendered to the narrative being built around me. Before ending the call, she mentioned that Vanessa had canceled lunch plans that morning without explanation. Apparently, she claimed a client emergency had appeared unexpectedly. The detail seemed insignificant at first. After hanging up, I sat staring across the reservoir while turning that information over in my mind. Something about it bothered me. An hour later, I returned to town and stopped at a gas station near the interstate. While paying for coffee, I noticed a television mounted above the counter showing local business news. A segment featured a commercial real estate conference taking place that same day at a hotel downtown. Hundreds of brokers and agents were attending. I barely paid attention until a familiar face appeared briefly in the background of a crowd shot. Vanessa. I froze. According to Alicia, she was handling an emergency client issue. Instead, she appeared at a conference. Maybe that meant nothing. Maybe she simply changed plans. Yet another inconsistency had entered the story. By evening, curiosity pushed me toward a decision I had avoided for days. Rather than going home immediately, I parked near the public library and carried my laptop inside. The building remained open until 9. A handful of students occupied study tables. The scent of old books and freshly cleaned carpet filled the air. I found a quiet corner near the archives section and opened the documents Derek had sent earlier. This time I focused on names rather than transactions. Dozens appeared across various filings. Attorneys, investors, contractors, consultants. Then one entry stopped me cold. A witness statement listed an administrative assistant named Melissa Warren. The name meant nothing until I remembered the photographs from the restaurant. My pulse quickened. I pulled one of the digital copies onto the screen and enlarged the image. The unknown woman standing beside me suddenly looked different. Not unfamiliar anymore. Older now, perhaps. Different hairstyle, different clothing, but recognizable. I had met her before. Years ago, during the same property dispute connected to Vanessa. And if my memory was correct, Melissa Warren had not worked for me. She had worked for Vanessa. Saturday morning arrived with heavy humidity hanging over the city. Instead of attending a youth football fundraiser I had promised to visit, I drove straight to an address I found buried inside one of Derek's documents. The location sat on the edge of an older commercial district nearly 40 miles away. Most of the surrounding buildings looked forgotten by time. Faded signs hung above empty storefronts. Cracked sidewalks stretched beneath rows of aging brick structures. According to the records, Melissa Warren now operated a bookkeeping service from a second-floor office above a printing company. I parked across the street and checked the time. 10:15. My hands remained steady. That surprised me. Earlier in the week, I had been reacting to events, following clues, waiting for answers. Not anymore. This time I was going to ask questions directly. A narrow staircase led to the second floor. The hallway smelled faintly of paper, dust, and copier toner. Suite 204 sat near the end. I knocked once. A woman opened the door a few seconds later. Gray streaks ran through her hair now. Reading glasses rested on top of her head. The years had changed her appearance, yet I recognized her immediately from both the photograph and the memory that surfaced inside the library. She looked at me politely. Then confusion crossed her face. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Melissa Warren?" "Yes." I took a breath. "My name is Marcus Johnson." Everything changed. The color left her face so quickly it almost seemed unreal. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she stepped aside. "You should come in." Her office was small. One desk, 2 chairs, filing cabinets lining a wall. A fan rotated slowly near the window. Melissa closed the door behind us and sat down. "I wondered if this day would ever happen," she said quietly. My pulse accelerated. "What does that mean?" She folded her hands together. "How much do you know?" "Not enough." Melissa stared at the desk before answering. "Years ago, I worked with Vanessa." I nodded. "I know that part." She released a long breath. "Then you probably know there was an investigation." "Yes." "What you may not know is that the investigation nearly expanded." The room suddenly felt smaller. Melissa opened a drawer and removed a thin folder. The edges looked worn from age. She placed it on the desk between us. I kept copies. My eyes dropped to the folder. Copies of what? Conversations. Internal correspondence. Requests. A strange buzzing sensation filled my ears. Melissa continued. Some people were worried certain records might become public. Others wanted those records located before that happened. Her gaze met mine. Your name came up more than once. I sat motionless. Mine. Because Vanessa believed you still had access to something she could not recover. The fan continued, turning overhead. Back and forth. Back and forth. Melissa opened the folder and slid several pages toward me. I scanned the first document, then the second, then the third. One sentence appeared repeatedly across multiple emails. Find out whether Marcus still has the archive. Another line followed months later. No direct contact until we know what he remembers. My throat tightened, not from fear, from realization. This had not started recently. This had been unfolding for years. Why are you showing me this now? I asked. Melissa looked exhausted, like someone carrying a burden for too long. Because I made a mistake by staying silent. She paused. And because Vanessa contacted me 2 weeks ago. Every thought inside my head stopped. What? Melissa nodded. She asked if I remembered where the archive ended up. The office seemed completely still. No traffic noise. No voices from the hallway. Nothing. What did you tell her? I asked. The truth. I told her I did not know. She leaned forward. Marcus, listen carefully. Whatever is on that storage device matters far more than you realize. My phone suddenly vibrated against the desk. Alicia. I answered immediately. Her voice arrived fast and uneven. Where are you? Why? A pause. Then words I will never forget. Someone left another package at our house this morning. I stood up instantly. What was inside? Silence. Then Alicia answered. This time it was not photographs. It was a printed report claiming you have been hiding money from me. The drive back felt strangely quiet. Not peaceful. Not chaotic. Just suspended, as if everything around me had stepped into slow motion while my mind tried to catch up. Traffic moved steadily along the highway. Billboards passed overhead. A radio host somewhere discussed college football rankings, but I could not focus on a single word. The printed report Alicia mentioned kept replaying inside my head. Whoever was behind this was adapting. First photographs, then reservation records, now financial accusations. Each new attack seemed designed for a specific purpose, not to prove anything, to create doubt. By the time I reached our street, the afternoon sun sat low above the rooftops. Alicia was waiting on the front porch. She held a manila envelope against her chest. The moment I stepped out of the truck, she handed it to me without speaking. We moved inside and sat at the dining room table. The paperwork looked official at first glance. Charts, account summaries, transaction histories. Several pages carried my name. The problem was simple. Most of it was nonsense. Account numbers did not match. Dates conflicted with one another. Some entries referenced institutions I had never used. Whoever created the report understood enough about finance to make it appear convincing to someone unfamiliar with the details. Alicia watched me carefully. Can you explain it? She asked. I slid one page toward her and pointed to a section near the bottom. See this? She nodded. It says money was transferred on a Tuesday. Okay. I was in Denver with the football team that entire week. Alicia studied the document. How do you know? I stood up and walked into the hallway closet. A few moments later, I returned carrying a storage box filled with old travel folders. After several minutes of searching, I found the trip itinerary. The dates matched perfectly. Alicia compared the records side by side. Her expression softened slightly. Not because everything was fixed, because facts were beginning to push back against fiction. As evening settled over the neighborhood, we ordered takeout from a small barbecue restaurant nearby. It was the first meal we had shared all week without tension dominating every minute. For a little while, the conversation drifted toward ordinary things. Patients at the clinic, upcoming school events, a neighbor who somehow managed to back his pickup truck into the same mailbox twice in 1 month. Alicia even smiled once. The moment felt fragile, like thin glass. Yet it mattered. Around 8 o'clock, while cleaning containers from the table, I noticed something unusual through the front window. A vehicle sat across the street. Dark sedan. Engine running. Lights off. Maybe it belonged to a visitor. Maybe not. 20 minutes later it remained there. So did my attention. Eventually the car pulled away. I told myself it was nothing. Still, I found myself checking the street again before closing the curtains. Later that night, Alicia headed upstairs early. I stayed behind and opened the folder Melissa had given me. This time I examined every page carefully. Names. Email chains. Internal notes. One document stood out from the rest. It was not a legal record. It looked more like a personal memo. At the top sat a date from nearly 7 years ago. Below it appeared a short paragraph written by Melissa herself. The note described a meeting involving several people connected to the disputed development project. Most names were familiar by now. Then I reached a sentence that changed everything. Vanessa believes the archive contains correspondence she never intended anyone else to see. I read the line 3 times. Correspondence. Not financial data. Not contracts. Correspondence. That meant messages, conversations, communications. The archive might contain far more than business records. It might contain motives, relationships, decisions people wanted forgotten. I leaned back in my chair and stared toward the ceiling. Suddenly, an entirely new possibility emerged. What if Vanessa was not trying to recover evidence against herself? What if she was terrified of evidence connected to somebody else? A chill moved through me. The entire story looked different from that angle. The photographs, the reports, the pressure, the urgency. Maybe none of it was about protecting her career. Maybe she was protecting another person. Someone important enough to justify years of effort. Someone powerful enough to remain hidden until now. Just before midnight, I finally picked up the USB drive. For several seconds, I simply held it in my hand. 7 years. Hundreds of questions. Countless coincidences. Then I turned it over and noticed something I had never seen before. A tiny white label had been attached to the back. The ink had faded with age, but one handwritten word remained barely visible beneath the wear. Trustee. And suddenly I had a new question. Why would business records need a trustee at all? I did not wait until morning. At 12:14 in the morning, with the entire house asleep, I carried my laptop into the downstairs den, plugged the USB drive into the computer, and sat alone beneath the soft glow of a desk lamp. Outside, crickets filled the darkness with a steady chorus. Inside, my heartbeat seemed louder than the room itself. The drive took several seconds to load. Then dozens of folders appeared on the screen. Financial statements, property records, meeting notes. Exactly what I expected. What I did not expect was a folder labeled Correspondence Archive. My cursor hovered over it for a moment before I opened it. Hundreds of emails filled the screen. Years of conversations. Names I recognized. Names I did not. I began reading. 1 hour passed. Then another. The deeper I went, the clearer everything became. Vanessa had not spent years trying to hide missing money. She had spent years trying to hide how the money disappeared. Buried within those messages were discussions about altered reports, concealed transactions, and deliberate efforts to shift responsibility onto people who had nothing to do with the decisions being made. Yet the biggest surprise was still waiting. Near the bottom of a chain dated 7 years earlier, I found the reason she feared the archive so much. Several messages revealed that a senior partner connected to the development project had privately instructed others to remove records before regulators could review them. That partner was not Vanessa. She had been protecting him the entire time. The photographs, the fabricated reports, the pressure campaign, all of it suddenly made sense. She was not trying to destroy me because of something I had done. She was trying to reach the one thing standing between her and a secret powerful people wanted buried forever. Just before sunrise, I printed key documents and organized everything into folders. Later that afternoon, Derek reviewed the files. Melissa confirmed their authenticity. Harold connected us with the proper legal channels. Over the following weeks, the truth finally moved into the open where it belonged. The false allegations against me collapsed under scrutiny. The manipulated images were exposed. The financial claims fell apart. Most importantly, Alicia saw the full picture for herself. No dramatic speeches were needed. No revenge. No celebration. Just facts. Quiet, undeniable facts. One evening several months later, Alicia and I sat together on our back porch watching the last light fade beyond the trees. A warm breeze moved through the yard. Somewhere nearby, children laughed while riding bicycles down the street. Life had not returned to what it was before. In some ways, it became stronger. We learned that trust is not built when everything is easy. Trust reveals its value when uncertainty arrives and refuses to leave. Alicia rested her hand on mine and looked toward the horizon. Neither of us needed to say much. Some lessons speak for themselves. Looking back, now, I realize the most dangerous lies are not the ones strangers tell. They are the ones that arrive wearing a familiar face. And sometimes the smallest object sitting unnoticed in your home can hold the truth that changes everything. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story meant something to you, please take a moment to like the video and follow the channel for more stories like this. And remember, when the noise finally fades, The truth often remains exactly where it has always been, waiting patiently for someone willing to look.